Master Studios here. How y'all doing? Now, when it comes to Ninjago, we have gotten a lot of episodes over the years, and obviously everyone has their own personal favorite and least favorite episodes. But in today's video, I want to take a look at the worst rated episode of Ninjago and take a look at in order to answer the question of whether or not this episode is really all that bad and if it deserves the title of the worst rated Ninjago episode. And when it comes to the worst rated Ninjago episode, that would be the Season 11 episode, The Absolute Worst. So, let's get into this whole thing. Now, I'm sure you're probably wondering, how did I determine that this is the worst rated Ninjago episode? And the answer is simple. I went to IMDB. Now, I know that IMDB isn't really the best source of information to go to when it comes to looking up information for TV shows and movies, given the fact that anyone can put any information that they want on the website. But this was the only place where I could actually find ratings for Ninjago episodes, so it's really all I have to go on. Also, fun fact about when it comes to Ninjago, specifically the Wildbrain era going from Season 11 to Crystallized, because a lot of people tend to forget that it is technically its own show, that is actually the highest rated Ninjago show, sitting at an 8 out of 10 stars. Meanwhile, when it comes to Masters of Spinjitzu, that sits at a 7.7 out of 10, and Dragon's Rising is actually the lowest rated Ninjago show at 7.6 out of 10, which is something that I was honestly really surprised by taking a look at the ratings for the shows. But anyway, when it comes to the absolute worst, when taking a look at all the different episodes across the different Ninjago shows, this episode is the lowest rating, sitting at a whopping 5.3 out of 10. That is definitely a really low score. And so again, I want to take a look at this episode and ask the question, is the episode really that bad? So, let's get into this whole thing. So, right off the bat, I feel like there is a big problem when it comes to this episode, and that would be the placement of this episode. This was one of the two Fire Chapter episodes that ended up airing during the Ice Chapter, and I feel like this ended up interrupting the pacing of the Ice Chapter, given the fact that the Ice Chapter only has 13 episodes, meaning that when it comes to the plot of the season, it had to be condensed into fewer episodes in comparison to the Fire Chapter. And so I feel like having two episodes being placed right in the middle of plot-heavy episodes during the Ice Chapter is something that did end up interrupting the pacing of the season, which again I do feel is already an issue when it comes to the episode. But anyway, the episode properly starts off at Criterion Prison with some of the guards learning that the ninja have gone missing, and the warden does not want this information getting out because he's worried about what the prisoners might end up doing if they hear about this. We then cut to the courtyard of Criterion Prison, where we get the chance to see some familiar faces, including Captain Soto, Kilo, Ultraviolet, and the Mechanic, who, fun fact, is actually voiced by his original voice actor this time around. Yeah, for those of you who didn't know, when the Mechanic made his brief cameo appearance during Season 8, he actually ended up getting recasted. But starting in Season 11, his original voice actor who voiced the Mechanic back during Season 6 actually returned, and he's been voicing the Mechanic ever since then, which is something that I think is honestly pretty cool. And if I'm correct, this actually makes this the only real instance in the Ninjago show, specifically not counting the movie or the video games, where a character would end up having their voice actor replaced, only for the original voice actor to come back and voice that character again, which again, I do think that is honestly pretty cool. So anyway, that night, the Mechanic and Ultraviolet are able to escape from their cells using the Mechanic's mechanic alarm, and the two of them are able to make their way into the sewer system in order to break out of Criterion Prison. However, while they're escaping from Criterion Prison, they encounter Fuji-Dove. And even though this is Fuji-Dove's one and only appearance in Season 11, I do not like it, and when it comes to Fuji-Dove, I honestly think he's one of the worst Ninjago characters of all time. Primarily because I think that Fuji-Dove is so annoying and obnoxious. I honestly don't think any of its comedic bits really work all that well. He is occasionally able to get a laugh out of me here and there, but by and large, I just don't really think he's funny. And I feel like Fuji-Dove at times does have a tendency to overstay his welcome, especially during Crystallized, and it's something that I honestly really did not like. I get where the show is coming from when it comes to Fugidove. The idea behind him is that he's essentially meant to be like an evil Dareth, where the idea is how the two of them both try to build themselves up in order to be these really big and important figures when in actuality they aren't. The thing is though, I think that Dareth is a legitimately entertaining character who's actually grown and changed a lot over the years. Meanwhile, Fugidove has basically stayed the same ever since his introduction, which is something that honestly I don't like. And again, honestly, I just think that Fugidove is a really annoying and obnoxious character. Now, I do think that Fugidove does get a lot worse in later seasons, but I still don't think he's very good in this episode, and I still find him to be a really annoying and obnoxious character. So anyway, the three criminals continue to make their way through the sewers, and all three of them talk about which ninja they think is the worst. For Ultraviolet, it's Zane, for the mechanic, it's Nia, and for Fugidove, it's Jay. And the three criminals all tell stories explaining why they think that ninja is the worst, and these stories are accompanied by a shift in animation, with the episode switching to having a 2D art style. And this is, without question, the most controversial thing of the entire episode. When it was announced that Season 11 would be containing episodes that had 2D animation, a lot of fans really did not like this, and a lot of fans automatically wrote off the episodes as being bad, essentially just because they had 2D animation. Even before anyone actually saw the episodes, people just automatically considered them to be bad, again, basically just because of the 2D animation. Now, as for me personally, when it comes to the 2D animation, I honestly think it looks pretty good overall. When it comes to the 2D animation, I think that for the most part, it honestly looks pretty solid. The backgrounds look really good. The action, I think, is honestly really great. And my only real issue when it comes to the 2D animation would be the character designs, as I don't really think a lot of them look that well overall. Some of the characters I think definitely look better in the 2D animation in comparison to others. And again, I feel like the character models are my only real issue with the 2D animation. But in terms of stuff for the visuals and how the episode looks, I honestly think that it does look really good with the 2D animation. And when it comes to the episode containing 2D animation, I feel like this is honestly a good example of what I feel like is one of the biggest strengths of the WildBrain era, and that was the sheer creativity that we got with the episodes. When it comes to the episode switching to an 11-minute format, I honestly feel like this was a good thing for Ninjago because it allowed for the people who worked on the show to be a lot more creative with the episode concepts, because we could get things that we could never get with the episodes being 22 minutes long. And I feel like an episode that contains a shift in art style with us getting segments in 2D animation is a pretty good example of that. Again, the sheer creativity is something that I honestly think is a really great thing about not just Season 11, but really the WildBrain era as a whole, and it's one of the biggest reasons why I honestly love this era of Ninjago so much. So anyway, Ultraviolet tells her story explaining why she thinks Zane is the worst ninja, talking about a time when she was able to defeat Lloyd and Nia with the two of them cowering in fear at her, at which point Zane then showed up on a jet. So Ultraviolet went up in order to try and stop him. However, Zane ended up undergoing a transformation sequence and he was able to freeze her in a block of ice. And something that you guys may have realized is that when it comes to the story, it's actually meant to be what happened at the end of Season 9, albeit with some things being pretty different. Fugidove even points out that Zane wasn't riding a jet, but instead he was on a dragon when he defeated Ultraviolet. At which point Ultraviolet says that it's not what happened and he was on a jet. And this is another instance of the creativity when it comes to this episode, because this is basically meant to be Ultraviolet's perspective on what happened at the end of Season 9. And this episode shows us that Ultraviolet isn't really a reliable narrator, which does explain why a bunch of these things don't really line up with what actually happened during the Season 9 finale, which again, I think that is honestly something pretty cool. And so when it comes to the story overall, I think it is honestly alright. I feel like some of the jokes are able to work fairly well, the action looks really good, and again, I do think that the animation does honestly look solid. That being said though, there are a couple of other things that I want to bring up. For starters, there's the overacting. This is something that we get all throughout this episode, with the voice actors definitely overacting a lot. And I get the idea behind that because the entirety of this episode with these stories, it's basically meant to be a gigantic anime parody. And so that's what the voice actors were going for with this overacting. And sometimes it works, but other times I don't necessarily think it's able to work out all that well, and I do feel like the overacting does come off as a bit annoying at times. That's not to discredit the voice actors or anything. I think they did an absolutely fantastic job, although I do feel like the voice direction for them could have been a bit different. And then we have the character designs. Like I said, I do feel like some of the character designs do honestly look really well, other ones not as much. And this story I think is a good example of that. Because when it comes to Zane and Nia, I think the two of them honestly both look really good in the 2D animation. I think the two of them honestly look pretty solid, especially Zane. I think he honestly translated the best into the 2D art style out of any of the characters that show up in this episode, and Nia I think also looks pretty solid. As for Lloyd and Ultraviolet on the other hand, these two I think don't really look as good. For Lloyd, there's two big issues that I have with him. For one, his facial animation. Again, I get the idea that this episode is meant to be an anime parody, but I don't really think Lloyd's facial animation really looked the best. And the second thing is Lloyd being sleeveless, which in my opinion just looks really weird, especially since Lloyd's season 11 outfit isn't sleeveless, so him not having sleeves here just looks kind of strange in my opinion. And as for Ultraviolet, while for the most part I think she does look good, the thing that to me just looks a bit off is her hair. I don't know what it is about it specifically, but again, to me it just looks kind of off. And I think it does look better in Lego style in comparison to a more humanoid design for her. But still, overall, when it comes to the story, I think it was honestly pretty solid with a few hiccups here and there. So after this, we then have the mechanic explaining why he thinks Nia is the worst out of all the ninja, talking about a time when he tried to rob a jewelry store, but Nia showed up and she was able to stop him pretty easily. And that's pretty much it. I do think that when it comes to the mechanic's story, his is the most boring out of all these, primarily because I just don't really think it's as entertaining in comparison to the other stories. I don't think the jokes are all that funny this time around, and the action is alright, but I don't think it's anything that impressive. And overall, when it comes to the story, I don't really think it's that great. That being said, though, I do actually really like this line. I think it's really funny.
You're going away for theft and false advertising.
False advertising?
This truck doesn't even sell noodles. Does it? Does it?
And as for the mechanic's design, I think it is honestly solid, and I think it does honestly look good in the 2D animation. Finally, though, we get to Fugitive's story. And this story I'm honestly kind of mixed on, because there are things about this story that I do legitimately really like, and I feel like it's really able to show the strengths, the creativity with this episode. But then there are also some things about the story that I don't like, and really show some of the bigger problems with some of the things about the episode. Yet despite that, I would honestly consider it to be the best out of these three stories, primarily because of what we get at the very end of the story, because I think it's honestly hilarious. So anyway, the story starts off with Fugitive robbing a bank, and when it comes to Fugitive's design, I think it is honestly pretty solid. I think it's interesting how when it comes to Fugitive's design, it really incorporates his bird theming that he has when it comes to his outfit, with him having wings instead of the wing pieces, and him actually having talons. I think that is honestly something interesting to see. But anyway, Lloyd, Kai, and Cole all show up in order to try and defeat Fugitive, with the three of them all hang gliding for some reason. I'm not sure why. And when it comes to Kai and Cole, I think that these two are the worst in terms of the character design when it comes to the episode, because these two I really don't think look that well, primarily because of their hair being affected by the wind. It causes the two of them to look really strange overall, and when it comes to Cole, we run into a similar problem with Lloyd, where he's also sleeveless, and I think it looks kind of strange here. For Cole, I don't think it's as bad because his season 11 outfit also is sleeveless, although I still don't think it necessarily looks that well either. Also, I do think that when it comes to Kai and Cole, the two of them also have the worst out of all the overacting, and I do feel like when it comes to the two of them in particular, the overacting really isn't the best, and it does come off as more annoying this time around, and it's something that I wasn't really the biggest fan of. But anyway, Fugitive is able to defeat the ninja, sending them all hurtling down towards Ninjago City, at which point we then get what is by far the best part of the entire episode. So, what we end up getting at the very end of the story is a full-blown Dragon Ball parody with Jay acting as Goku and him defeating Fugitive using a Ninjago version of the Kamehameha, this time with it being called a Ninjago! which sounds more like a Hadoken from Street Fighter, just want to point that out there. And Fugitive is ultimately defeated, with Jay acting like the two of them have been friends for a really long time, but the two of them have turned into bitter rivals, and he feels really bad about having to do this. And I just think that this entire segment is absolutely hilarious. I really like how this part of the story leans the most into the anime parody that they were going for, and I honestly think it works really well, with this entire segment being absolutely hilarious. The whole thing just basically comes out of nowhere, yet in a weird way, I think it honestly works really well just because of how absurd the whole thing is. Especially when it comes to Jay, with, again, him essentially being Goku in this scene. I think it's honestly something hilarious, and I do think that when it comes to Jay, his design does honestly look really great, Super Saiyan hair and all. And honestly, when it comes to this whole segment, even though I haven't actually seen Dragon Ball before, it's something that I can still honestly appreciate just because of how funny the whole thing is. And I feel like this moment is honestly a good instance of the show being able to reference something where even if you don't get the reference, you can still understand what's going on and you can still have a good time either way. And again, when it comes to this ending segment of the story, I just think it's absolutely hilarious. And again, it's by far my favorite part of the entire episode. So anyway, after the story is done, the Mechanic and Ultraviolet are pretty quick to point out how what Fugitive said didn't make any sense at all, especially when it came to Jay using stuff like lightning chains and being able to ride on lightning and how it didn't make any sense at all. With Fugitive saying that it is what happened, once again relating into the idea of the unreliable narrators that we see throughout the episode. But anyway, the three criminals are eventually able to escape from Criterion Prison, making their way out of the sewers, with the three of them planning on going on a crime spree, at which point Pixel then shows up and she's able to recapture the three of them. And this is something that honestly I'm not really a big fan of, because while I get the idea that the criminals need to be arrested in order to go back to Criterion Prison, at the same time, though, as a result of that, it feels like there wasn't really anything that plot significant that happened during this episode outside of Fugitive's introduction. With that basically being the only exception, a lot of the stuff when it comes to this episode really doesn't matter to the plot of really Season 11 or even the show as a whole. And I feel like there was honestly a really big missed opportunity here, specifically with the Mechanic escaping, because at the beginning of Season 12, we see that the Mechanic was able to get out of Criterion Prison, yet the show doesn't explain how he was able to do that. And this episode would have been a way to actually explain how the Mechanic was able to get out of Criterion Prison. He escaped during this episode and he wasn't recaptured by Pixel. And again, I think it honestly would have been really interesting to actually see that in order to explain this thing during Season 12. Again, I think that would have been good. But anyway, the criminals end up getting recaptured and they're sent back to Criterion Prison, and we get an unfunny moment of Pixel not knowing Fugitive's name. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. So to answer the big question of, do I think this episode is really that bad, and do I think this episode deserves to be considered the worst rated Ninjago episode? Honestly, I don't think so. While, yes, I wouldn't really say this episode is that good either, I wouldn't say it's that bad either. I feel like there's honestly a lot of genuinely good things about this episode. Stuff like the creativity present throughout the episode. Some of the stories I think are honestly pretty entertaining, and for the most part, I think that the 2D animation does honestly look pretty good. There are definitely some things about this episode that I don't think are the best, like for example, the Mechanic story I don't think is very interesting, and some of the character designs don't really look that great, and again, I really do not like Fugitive. Plus, there was also the missed opportunity at the ending, but by and large, when it comes to this episode, again, I honestly don't really think it's all that bad, and I feel like there are honestly a lot of pretty good elements about this episode. And so I honestly wouldn't consider this to be the worst rated episode of Ninjago. I wouldn't really even consider this to be the worst episode of Season 11. That honor goes to Snake-Tastrophe, a significantly worse episode in so many ways. I even made an entire video talking about that. But overall, when it comes to this episode, again, I honestly don't think it's that bad. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. So tell me down below what do you guys think. Tell me what are your guys' thoughts on this episode. Again, tell me down below and I hope you guys enjoy. Later, guys, this is Dimension Master Studios, signing off.